Hello and welcome to episode 132 of Authors Afterword. On this podcast, I talk to an author about one, occasionally more, of their books in detail. And if you find yourself enjoying today's episode, do share it with your friends. So, I'm Charlie Place, and joining me today is Clémence Michallon, the author, most recently, of Our Last Resort, which we'll be talking about today. A psychological suspense, the book takes us firstly to the Utah desert where brother and sister Gabriel and Frida are holidaying together, properly spending time together for the first time in years. But on day 5 of their stay, the girlfriend of a wealthy media man is murdered. Frida is instantly concerned for her brother. Years ago, his wife died and word continued to spread that he had killed her, despite the police letting him go. Frida doesn't want this new death to become a second association. As she worries about Gabriel and who killed the woman, we're taken back in time to the siblings' childhood in a cult in the Hudson Valley that we know from the present-day narrative they escaped. Hello, Clémence.
Hello, thank you for having me, and thank you for this beautiful summary.
You are welcome, and it is lovely to have you. I sped through your book. It was just so fast-paced, and some of it wasn't what I expected at all, which was lovely. I loved being surprised by it, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to hear that.
I want to start, actually. I usually start with the inspiration, but the title is really clever. And I wanted to ask you about that. It's got a pun in it. It's got some foreshadowing in it. Did you come up with it yourself? Has it been there from the start, etc.?
Thank you for noticing. I did come up with the title myself, at least as best as I can remember. Anytime I say this, I worry I'm going to accidentally steal credit from my editor or my agent or my husband, who all chime in at various points of the process. But as far as I can remember, this was not always the title. Our Last Resort used to be called something else. And that was my working title for a long time. And then the title conversation came up. And I know that I rarely nail a title on my first try. So I'm never surprised when I have to start discussing it and looking at changing it. And I think I sent a list of possible titles, and Our Last Resort was on it. And of course, it's a play on words because much of the book is set at a hotel in the desert in Utah, which is a resort, but there's, of course, the idea of a last resort as well. And I was playing with that, and I think a couple of combinations had already been used. I'm not the first person to think of that pun in the context of crime fiction or fiction in general. So I think The Last Resort was taken, Last Resort was taken, but also Our Last Resort made sense to me because this is a book about being together, be it as part of a group or as part of a duo. It really is a book about togetherness. And so I thought, Our Last Resort, that would work. And it is the first and last pun I will ever make in public because I'm not usually a very punny person. But, everything can happen. And as it turned out, I made a pun.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I mean, you kind of get an idea of the resort itself, the holiday part from the cover. But the rest of it, when I saw it and I worked out in my head, I was like, that is good. I like it, yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I also think, and I can say it because that was not my doing, I think they did a really, really good job on the cover, both in the US and in the UK. They're very similar. There are just a couple of details that are different in each market. But overall, the design, I find it really good. I think they nailed it.
I'm going to agree with you. I think it's a very good cover as well. Yeah. So to the inspiration then, where I usually start. Can you talk us through the initial inspirations, where you started from?
Of course. So this was a novel where, for me, the setting came first, actually, which is kind of rare for me. I've only published 2 crime novels, but in terms of coming up with ideas and stories and projects, I rarely think about setting first. But for this one, what happened was my previous book, The Quiet Tenant, was set in the Hudson Valley in the winter. And I don't know if you've been to the Hudson Valley, but it's New York State. So the winters are very cold. So in that book, in my previous crime novel, the ground is frozen. It's always cold. The sun sets at 5 p.m. And The Quiet Tenant is a captivity story as well as a serial killer story. So the settings are very bare and simple. There's a garden shed, there's a restaurant, there is a house, and that's about it. And I loved working on that book. When the time came to start thinking about my next writing project, I thought to myself, I'd like to go somewhere warm. I'd like to go somewhere beautiful. I'd like to go to a place where people travel to on purpose and willingly. And my mind traveled back to this hotel in the desert in Utah where I went 15 years ago with my parents. And it was one of the most beautiful places I had ever seen in my life. But it was also extremely isolated, very remote. And you were very aware, or at least I was very aware of the fact that there was a contrast. While you were in the hotel, all your needs were met, sometimes even before you could formulate them to yourself. A drink would be served to you before you could think you were thirsty. But also, you were surrounded by the desert, and this was summer, so it was incredibly hot and dangerous. This is a climate that is inhospitable to human life. And that means that if you want to make a quick escape, you can't. You can't walk very far. They have your car because obviously you valet. There are coyotes around. And also, if you end up maybe having a little bit of an argument with your travel companions, as can happen, you're stuck with them. There's nowhere else to go, nothing to do but hanging out with them. So I thought, well, that would be a really good place to set a murder story. And that was my first point of entry into Our Last Resort.
Okay, yeah, so you've been drawn to isolation again in that way. And you mentioned the car park, actually. It's not really occurred to me to think of any questions with the car park itself. But yeah, you saying about the parking and you'd notice the parking, of course, that becomes quite a big thing towards the end of the novel, yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say, this bit I made up. So the hotel in my book ended up being its own thing, and it's sort of inspired by the real place that I visited. But I couldn't go back as research for this book because it's only gotten more expensive as time has gone on.
Yeah.
And I discussed it with my accountant. And in the US, if you spend something for work, you can write it off your taxes. I'm sure there's something similar in the UK. But even with this option, it was still not financially responsible for me to make that trip. It wasn't going to be worth the anxiety that I would get from it. So I ended up working from memory, but I think it also gave me some much needed distance from reality, which I find very liberating as a novelist. And so one point was that I could not, for the life of me, remember or figure out where the cars went. But I knew there were cars because the only way you can get to the hotel is by driving. That was really something I distinctly remembered, was like you didn't have an immediate access to your vehicle. And so for the needs of the novel, I ended up coming up with my own solution, but I actually don't know. I have no idea how closely at all it matches reality.
You got to go look that up, find out.
I know, I've got to look it up. I've got to go back. I've got to save up and go back. But it's a big topic, right? Like, especially in the US, it's such a car reliant country. Yeah. I'm especially attuned to that because I'm a new driver. I've been driving for a year, and I can tell just how much more independent I feel and how much freer I feel now that I know how to drive in the US. And I resent it because it shouldn't be that way. But it was just something that was on my mind. If you lose access to your vehicle, it's something you're aware of.
Yeah. I'm going to move us on for now, but I think we're going to end up talking about this a little bit later when we talk about the ending itself. The writing, you've written in the first person perspective. Was it always going to be a one-person narrative? Because I believe the Quiet Tenant, you've got various narratives, so I wondered how that kind of matched up.
Yeah, it's a good question. So The Quiet Tenant, you're right, is a novel told in multiple points of view. The idea was it's the story of a male serial killer, but he doesn't get to speak. We hear from his captive victim and his teenage daughter and a woman who doesn't know he's a serial killer and who has a crush on him. And then also there's smaller, shorter chapters who are from his past victims. There was a relative unity of time and place in that book. And we traveled from one person's head to another, roughly speaking. And I love playing with different modes of storytelling. For me, figuring out how I'm going to tell the story is almost as important as figuring out what story I'm going to tell. The two are very intertwined. And I'm sure a lot of novelists feel this way. And so I thought, well, for this one, I'd like to do dual timelines. So that's what happened, right? Our Last Resort has two timelines, one that spans days and focuses on the murder investigation at the hotel and its consequences on Gabriel and Frida. And the other spans years and years and follows their past in the cult and the fallout from that. And that was deliberate. Once I figured out that they had been raised at a cult together, I thought, well, it should be dual timelines that would work well. And I was very naive about it. I thought, let's just do it. We're just going to do dual timelines. It's going to be great. And as it turns out, it's really hard. You really have to work quite hard to write the adults who would grow out of these children and the children who would become these adults. And you also have to have a really firm grasp on not just the passage of time, but also pacing, how you render the passage of time in writing. And sometimes you have to sort of elegantly catch up the reader on what has been going on in this 5 to 8 years that we're not going to be delving into too much detail for whatever reason. So it was a really interesting challenge.
That was interesting. I've noted down what you said about basically the how and the what of the story being important as well. That's interesting. So talking about Frida herself, I suppose, moving on from narrative, you have included her past, as you say, you're including the past, you are looking into how to show it. I think it's interesting actually that you have picked a cult, because what you've said just a minute ago, I was thinking that you might say something like, it makes it more difficult because, of course, then you've got to think about how they're learning. Not only that they are getting older, of course, but how they're learning about a new world, which is interesting. But could you expand on, etc., the importance of showing Frida's past, the importance of the cult in your book?
Absolutely. So for me, the first thing I figured out was the setting, right? I think it's really something about how the various pieces come together. So the setting, I knew a murder was going to happen in a beautiful hotel. So that's one thing. And then I figured out that someone was going to have to wonder whether someone they love is capable of murder, whether someone they love committed this murder. So that became Frida has to consider whether Gabriel killed the woman in the hotel and whether Gabriel is capable of murder in general. And that's a question I tend to go back to a lot as a novelist, which is how well do you ever really know the people you love? And I figured if someone you love is accused of murder, of course, your first reaction is generally going to be denial, right? No, there's no way. I know this person. There's no way they would be capable of this. But in the face of mountain evidence suggesting that they did it, you would be expected to lower your disbelief, to entertain that possibility, however painful that may be. But for the interest of the novel, I needed Frida's mental barriers to be really high. I needed it to mean the end of the world for her if she had to realize that Gabriel, this man whom she considers to be her brother, is capable of murder and is not who she thought he was. And so I thought, well, something needs to have happened to these two to have created that bond that kind of goes beyond what most people experience. And I thought to myself, well, if they had grown up in a cult together and sort of survived that together and built a world together, not just a life, but a whole world, then that would make it really, really hard for Frida to consider that maybe not everything is what she thinks it is, and Gabriel is not who she thinks he is. It would mean the end of her world. And that's the kind of emotional stakes that I think you need in a crime novel, right? Everything has to be as heightened as it can possibly be. So that was why I decided to have that exploration of past and present in that way.
Okay. Let's throw a question out there that I think might be all right to ask now, or it's the right time to ask. Did you always know, had you always planned that Frida was going to have committed, say, the original murder?
It's a good question. And no.
Okay.
There are multiple drafts of this novel that have a different version of the story. What happened was, I went through a few drafts and my editor pointed out to me that sometimes a writer writes a story, and in that story, there are sort of little seeds of something that seems to be going somewhere. But because you're writing a whole novel and you're so busy figuring out every little aspect of the novel, you kind of don't see the forest for the trees, and you don't see what your own subconscious seems to be trying to do. And my editor pointed that out to me, and she said, I think that's the direction you're writing towards. And, that's always a sign of a good note, because I knew that changing the novel to make it so that Frida had committed the original murder, that means a full page rewrite. In a crime novel, if you change the ending, you have to change everything from the beginning. I reused a lot of material, but at the end of the day, I opened a new file and I started over, 0 word.
Goodness.
And
Okay.
yeah, so I knew it was going to be a giant undertaking on deadline, but I wanted to do it because I knew it would make the novel better. And that to me is always the sign of a great note, is the one that you want to implement, even though it just added 100 hours of work to your schedule. So that's how it happened. And I never looked back. I also noticed as soon as I started rewriting the novel in that way, everything tightened around Gabriel and Frida. They became more central, both of them, to the narrative. They became more active. Their decisions carried more weight. There used to be a whole side character who ended up getting written out during that revision because she was no longer needed, because these two really ended up taking center stage. And that was always what I wanted the novel to be. But sometimes you just don't know how to make it happen until the story takes the right shape.
I'm still reeling over here from, okay, you said that you took some parts that you'd already written and inserted them into this new draft, but you effectively, it sounds like then, started from 0 words again on a deadline.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm lucky because I used to have a full-time day job, but I no longer do. So when it turned out that I was going to have to do all this work, I was able to do it. It wasn't a matter of whether I was going to be able to do it, but just how. Figure out basically what word count I needed to hit every day to hit my deadline, and then just making sure that happened. So what I ended up doing is that I figured out I think I needed to write or rewrite or process 2,500 words a day, which for me is a lot. I know for some people it might not sound like that much, but my usual daily word count is much closer to 1,000 words, maybe 1,500 if I'm towards the end when it's easier.
Yeah.
But this was a marathon amount for me. And so what I did was, at the time I was living in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, I became a member of a library that is on the Upper East Side, so on the other side of Central Park. And so every day of work, basically, not every day, sometimes I worked from home, but every once in a while I would put my backpack on and cross the park and go to the library, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And then the library has quite Spartan rules about what you're allowed to bring, which is basically you're allowed to bring water and that's it. You can't even bring coffee. No snacks, nothing. And of course, it's the library, so you can't really do anything. And so you're sitting there and you're either drinking water or writing. And drinking water gets old quite quickly. So that's how I did it. And that's how I got it done. And it was a really good environment. I love that library, actually. It's in a former home of someone, I guess, on the Upper East Side when people still could have like houses in New York City. And it was a beautiful place, but it served me at a really intense time in my writer's life.
Yeah, no, you say that number, it always makes me think back to like school essays. That was always a bit more than school essays, and thinking of doing that work every day to me is, wow, that's quite a lot.
It was quite a lot. I mean, it's to me, as a journalist, if I got to write 3,000 words for a piece, I wouldn't churn that out in a day, even as a journalist. And when you're a journalist, you're quoting people. So that writes a chunk of your word count for you. And even that is a multi-day like endeavor, So no, it was definitely a challenge. And I'm glad I did it, but I am glad that it's over.
Maybe not do it again, yeah.
Hopefully not. I mean, now at least I know that I can. But
True.
hopefully it won't be that drastic.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask about the thoughts that Frida has. And you've got them on one line and then one line, and she's kind of talking to herself, and then another part of her seems to respond to that. They're all in italics. I really enjoyed them. I thought they were a really interesting way of telling your story. I just want to ask about your decision to use them and that sort of thing.
I'm glad you said you like them because I've noticed it's something I do a lot in my writing. And recently I was like, I don't know, keep doing this. Like, is this annoying? Um, but for me, I find those thoughts in italics usually are thoughts that the character who is thinking them wishes they could say out loud, but for whatever reason, they don't. And I find it really interesting to find out what people wish they could say out loud, but don't, say because they're shy or they feel like the other person is not going to understand or because it would be too much work, and I think we all have that kind of interior monologue all the time because for various reasons it's not considered polite to really say, you get invited somewhere and you're like, oh God, no, you're not going to say that.
I don't want to go to your party.
I don't want to go to your party. But I always find it really revealing to have that kind of interior monologue because it shows not only what the character is thinking, but also the disconnect between the truth of themselves and what they present to the world. And sometimes it's a necessary disconnect. We can't all go around saying what we think all day long, Yeah. But sometimes, of course, in the context of a crime novel, it's a bit thornier. So that's why I have these thoughts. I find it hard to write a book without them, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I also like them. I found from the reader's perspective, I suppose, that for me, they also kind of put into perspective the anxieties, I think, that Frida's got also like from her past, from her childhood. That's how I found it as well, which really kind of added it that way, a kind of a theme on its own, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's easier to have those thoughts than to have the character say, I think back to my childhood,
Yeah.
It's kind of a show, don't tell kind of thing. It's a kind of a way to let the character speak directly to the reader when you think about it, which is, it's interesting. I think it plays with point of view a little bit as well. I think about point of view a lot. I think about what person I'm going to use, first person, second person, third person. I think about that a lot. I usually change it around. Sometimes I have to write it all in one person and then change it to a different one. So The Quiet Tenant, my previous book, has a character whose perspective is written in the second person. So it's you. Originally, I'd written her in the first person, but I didn't think that sounded quite right. And to me, there is really a connection between that almost cosmetic, deliberate decisions and connecting with the character. To me, finding the voice of the character means understanding who they are. And only once I've done that do they really come to life for me.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think I've heard that for The Quiet Tenant, character came first for you. So that's interesting, taking this into where you've said location has come first as well. No, that is interesting. Yeah. And you said about the second person, I haven't read The Quiet Tenant. I love the second person. That's going on my list.
Oh, I love the second person so much. And I have to say, much like I started writing Our Last Resort, thinking I'm just going to do dual timelines, it's going to be great. I brought that same naivete to the second person in The Quiet Tenant. I did not realize that people had such strong reactions to the second person. It's very much a love it or hate it situation, and I accept it either way. It's more, I like it a lot as a reader. I've never minded it. And it didn't occur to me to think that it could be that divisive.
Yeah, no, yeah, I do. I love it. And yeah, like you, I suppose I understand academically why people don't like it, but it is a really good thing to use for crime fiction, certainly. I've read another book that was crime fiction with a full second person, and that was very good.
Ooh, what was it?
It was Tyler Keevil's You're Still Beating Heart. That's what it is.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, starting on the 5th day, I thought that was really interesting. And then, of course, you do have the 6th and the 7th, and I think you do go back and you do say the 1st and the 2nd. And then, obviously, also with the chapters that are in the Hudson Valley with the cult, you've got the way you do that. Can you talk about your chapter headings, I suppose?
Yes, I love chapter headings. I don't know why, but I can never help myself. I always have to do something fancy with the chapter headings. In Our Last Resort, like you said, in the present timeline in the hotel, the way the days of the week are displayed isn't Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's the 4th day, the 5th day, the 6th day of their stay. And then in the past chapters, it's however many years ago. So that was a bit of math for me. Yeah. But it goes from, 18 years ago to 15 years ago to 10 years ago. And the location is displayed as the only town we knew, Hudson Valley. And sometimes it changes. I think there's the only town we knew and a however many mile radius around it, Hudson Valley. And in The Quiet Tenant, I played with that a little bit too, because I have 3 main perspectives. And two of them are identified by their names, so that's normal. But the third one is the woman in the house. Well, first she's the woman in the shed, then the woman in the house. We don't know her name. And as her situation evolves, the chapter headings change. I find chapter headings to be one of the spaces where you can kind of perform the act of writing a little bit.
Yeah.
In the chapters themselves, it really is about the story. And I try to disappear as much as I can. I don't want people to be thinking about me. I want people to be thinking about the characters and the story. Anything that pulls them out of the book and makes them think of me, the author, is bad. I had misgivings, actually. I included an Easter egg in Our Last Resort that is a callback to the Quiet Tenant. And even that, I was like, I'm not sure, because it's going to just remind people. It's like tapping the reader on the shoulder and being like, remember, I wrote this, but I did it anyway because I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
But the chapter headings and the epigraphs, actually, I find are two places where you can ham it up a little bit and you can be a little deliberate and you can do something a little artistic.
Yeah.
And so that's why I like playing with my chapter headings. I'm happy to report I'm still doing it in my next novel.
No, it's fun, and it is nice seeing as a reader when you start a novel, oh, okay, we're going to do something like this. It's got details in it, or it's something a bit different. Yeah, it's nice.
I think it behooves us as writers to kind of utilize all the tools we have. Why would I write just chapter 4 when I can have a bit of fun with it and just make it that much more interesting? And I say this, I've read plenty of books that I adore where the chapter headings are just normal, and that's absolutely fine. I have never even noticed, but it's just, I find a little bit of poetry in it. And so, for example, the chapter headings when they're in the hotel saying the fourth night, the fifth day, the sixth day, etc. To me, that sounds a bit biblical, like the creation of the world. And I have a couple of biblical references in the book just because it is a book about like belief systems and stuff. And I was raised Catholic, so I have some knowledge of the Bible. And for some reason, it made sense to kind of infuse a bit of the novel with this. There's also references to a lot of ancient Roman civilization, including their gods. So it was just kind of various belief systems made their way into this book, including the chapter headings.
Mm-hmm. So in the last line, I think it is the last line, you speak about family. I think it's what you do for family, that sort of thing. With the last line, it made me think as a reader, it kind of started a story in itself for me, thinking about, okay, what's family? And going back and thinking of how you'd done the novel, what Frida had done, in a kind of thinking about it deeper. So yeah, I just wanted to ask more about kind of this whole idea of family and the siblings and that.
Yeah, and there's a slight paradox in the novel, right? Because I do think about Our Last Resort as a novel about family, and yet the two people at its center, we come to find out they call each other siblings, but not only are they not biologically related, but they don't share anything in common. You know, it's not like someone was adopted into someone else's family. Like there's just no infrastructure behind their bond, you know?
Yeah.
And all it is that they grew up in this cult and felt this draw towards each other in really trying circumstances. And they ended up meaning a lot to each other. And I think we often see family portrayed or described or thought of as a very wholesome place, a place of comfort and a place where the evils of the world go away. And it can be that. Hopefully it often is. But I think that is an oversimplification. We know, even from just reading the news, that families are complicated and that they're not immune to cruelty. And they're not immune to violence because it's people whom you love and you're close to. And those are the people that it's easiest to get hurt by, is the people you love. And also there's this idea of, you don't choose your family. It's kind of an incredible concept. There are people who are part of your world and you didn't choose them. And sometimes it's excellent and it's great, Sometimes it's just weird that we all have this sort of roulette going on in our lives that really determines a lot about us. And so for me, this became a novel about maybe other forms of family and chosen family, especially because I think that when you grow up, you start meeting people whom you do actively invite into your life and you do bond with over important things. And those bonds can be just as meaningful as the biological ones, and perhaps sometimes even more freeing, or you can feel more seen or better perceived for who you actually are, not who you used to be as a child.
Yes.
You know, it's nice sometimes to be met on your own terms as an adult. And so I think it was interesting writing about family from that point of view and writing about this sort of unconventional form of family.
First I was like, oh, we're going to find out more about it, and then you didn't, and I liked it. How you do kind of give the names of the parents of Frida and Gabriel, and that's it. You don't go back to that again.
Yes. What it came down to for me was I don't think these two would be so desperate to meet their parents, because we know from the past chapters that both Frida and Gabriel were born inside the cult, and the kids inside the cult don't know who their parents are. There are the mothers and the fathers collectively, but you don't know who is yours. And so I don't think it would necessarily occur to them to crave that connection to their parents. And even if they were able to track them down, why would they want to meet them? You know what I mean? I don't think they have any positive associations with their parents. And if anything, I think it would be really painful, and they would feel quite let down if they were to realize how different their life could have been. But I don't think that's a place that they want to go to, because it's painful to think of the upbringing they could have had they not been born in a cult. I would say maybe in the future they will. They do a lot of growing up in the pages of Our Last Resort. They go through a lot of things. So maybe at some point, maybe they wouldn't close the door entirely on that. But yes, for this novel, I think they were still in that phase of where they wouldn't be ready for that.
With what you're saying, it's made me realise that you do always just say the mothers. I don't think you give any of them a name. And I don't think actually you ever say the fathers.
No, but maybe, they come up quite rarely, because the cult is designed to sort of center Emil, the cult leader, as the man. So in a weird way, the mothers have a bit more power than the fathers. You know, they are made to feel like they matter. Really, it's because we come to find out they do a lot of work. But it sort of made sense for me. I found it interesting to explore the way the cult leader would kind of usurp this sort of appearance of power for the women to really just get them to do his bidding more.
You said a minute ago about how maybe Frida and Gabriel will meet their parents in the future. What else can you see in their futures?
Oh, that's so interesting. And I do want to say, just because I see it doesn't mean it's like correct in any way. Sure. I do believe, my expertise begins and ends with the first and the last page of the book. Anything that's not written in the book, I don't think I have any authority on it. But yeah, I guess I could see them at some point, one of them maybe wanting to find their parents, but would they even succeed? It definitely wouldn't be what they expect. This is so funny because I've been trying to avoid sharing spoilers for the whole summer. So this feels like forbidden. This feels, I guess I do want to think that Frida and Gabriel will remain in each other's lives. I hope that Gabriel is able to open up his world a little bit more and to find some peace. I hope I'm not misremembering my own novel when I say this, but I don't think he really does anything gravely wrong in the book.
No,
I think he's just trying his best. Right. Okay. Because I think I'm going to say that, meaning he didn't commit any murders, but then I'm going to forget about something really not cool that he did in some chapter.
You've been taken in too much by all the talk of the people in the background of the novel saying that Gabriel did what he did.
Yes, I know. Yes, exactly. And I've started to believe it myself. I'm like, is there really nothing going on with this guy? But I hope he's able to find some peace. I hope he's able to keep working for the writer he works for. But maybe he should also be writing his own stuff. I think he should graduate to being a co-author. For most of the book, Gabriel is the assistant to this nonfiction writer who writes these big books about the Roman Empire and just ancient Roman civilization. And I think maybe Gabriel could do his own research. Maybe he should go to school and, get his PhD. As you can tell, I'm really bad at figuring out what happens at the end of my books.
I mean, that's interesting in itself, isn't it? Because I can think of what I think might happen, but I'm coming at it from the perspective of someone who hasn't spent ages and so has definitely not spent day by day by day doing 2,500 words, writing the novel. I'm coming at it from a different perspective.
Exactly. What are you envisioning for them?
I do want them to be in each other's lives more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Part of me wants to say, and I don't know if it's because Gabriel doesn't have his own voice, his own narrative, but I suppose I want Gabriel to be stronger and maybe, stronger, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good word for it. Yeah.
I suppose, also because there isn't a narrative from him for a good reason, kind of get to a space where if, say, you wrote a sequel, he would have a narrative for particular reasons. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If that makes sense.
No, I think that makes sense. You know what else I think should happen? I think Frida should go do some charity work. I think it would be good for her.
Yes. And also meet all those different people and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would bring her a kind of peace that you can't really find anywhere else. Like there is a kind of peace that is found when you like know you're helping other people that you can't really get any other way. So I think she could benefit from that.
Yes, definitely. Actually, you saying that's made me think actually one day it'd be nice if she could get another job in a bank as well, maybe.
Or a different kind of job.
Yes.
You know, altogether. Yes.
Going on off topic here, but we don't find out what happens to a dog, so that'd be nice as well. I was really worried actually when you wrote the dog in. I'm so used recently to authors including a pet near the start, and then for me recently that's become a sign that the pet is possibly going to die later. I'm so glad Charlie was fine. That's great.
Charlie is all fine. I'm happy to go on the record for this. Actually, Charlie will be okay. He will live a long and happy life, and he will die his beautiful dog death at the last possible minute and comfortable after a day where he has all his favorite snacks and does his favorite activities. I'm very sentimental about animals, and I think I need to start adding a disclaimer at the start of my books, but I'm happy to just say it. Like, the animals are always okay in my books, the pets. And in this one, there's a coyote, and I also had to like include that the coyote was fine.
Yeah.
And that came out of writing my first crime novel, The Quiet Tenant. There's a dog in that book as well. And I remember at first I hadn't specified what happened to the dog in the end. And my editor was like, you've got to tell people what happened to the dog. People are going to want to know. And it's absolutely true. People always want to know that the dog is okay. So, and that's my guarantee. The dog is always okay. That's the Clémence Michallon guarantee.
I love it. Yeah. I think, I'm trying to think if other people have said, I don't know if anyone said like that before, but it's nice when you know that. Like, I suppose sometimes you want a book that is guaranteed happy ever after. That's actually what you said. It's actually really quite nice to have.
No, I cannot handle. And it's funny, right? Because I write crime novels. It's about people who do a lot of horrible things to a lot of other people. But in a way, I guess when you crack open a crime novel, that's part of the contract between the author and reader. You know, some crime is going to happen. And we find it horrible. And that's the entire reason we're compelled to read about these things in fiction in the first place, is because we can't wrap our heads around it at all. And so what we can't understand, I think we become obsessed with and process through a variety of ways, including fiction. To me, that's how I make sense of it. But I don't think it's necessarily part of the contract that a dog dies, you know? So I always make the dog okay at the end. But it's funny, like people will say that as a storyteller, people will like hold your feet to the fire a lot when it comes to the animals.
Yeah. No, I've also had people, when I've written reviews and people have said, oh, you've mentioned a dog here. Are they okay? I don't want to read this book. And I've had to say, yes, they're okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it will come up. Well, I saw, it was one of the movies in the Quiet Place series. I think it was the prequel. And there is a cat in that movie. And of course, because it's a movie about sort of how the end of civilization as we know it happens, a lot of devastation occurs. And I spent the entire movie really worried about the cat. And to the point that it's one of the main things I remember about watching the movie was being really worried about I mean, I loved the movie. I thought it was really good. And I was really worried about the cat. So I wished I had known that there would be a cat, and I wished that I had looked it up before going in, because, you know.
But we should probably say, listeners, because we have talked about this for a while now, that Clémence does have a dog. And obviously, you probably know, listeners, I've had rabbits in the past and I've had a dog. So, yeah. Yeah, we've gone so off topic. Annie.
Yes.
My goodness, did you make me think things that I'm not sure I was comfortable thinking? So I've actually written it out so I can explain my thoughts here. So Annie gets very angry about Edwina. And she's going to go to the police about it. And as I say, I think that raises an interesting question. Because I know for me, I was thinking she shouldn't do that because she wasn't thinking of the perspective of Gabriel, and she wasn't thinking of what he went through. And while in your narrative, Frida's making conscious choices, she is making them from the context of the cult. You can tell I've thought about this a lot. I have this whole thing written out. So I wanted to know what you thought about this as well. Yeah, because it's part of the heart of the novel, Annie's death. And also, like, how does a theme of privilege, if we've got the theme of privilege and disadvantage almost, and all this kind of thing.
I think this touches onto something that I find to be one of the most fascinating things in fiction, which is that when we watch a movie or read a book or watch a TV show, we always end up thinking, I think, of morality within the context of that show.
True.
For example, we watch The Sopranos, which is referenced in the book a lot because I love The Sopranos. It's a show about the mafia. So most of the characters are mobsters. They're criminals and they do horrible things. But because in the moral universe of the show, this mobster is the lead character. This mobster is someone we like very much for various reasons because the show has made them very funny or relatable in weird ways. And also within the universe of the show, everyone is in the mob. So you kind of like take that for granted. And then it's just who's a good mobster, who's a bad mobster. And you end up rooting for the good mobsters. But really, universally speaking, this is a show with bad guys all around. I think a similar thing happens in Our Last Resort, which is what Annie does is very rational.
Yeah.
She's pretty sure her husband murdered somebody. And I thought, well, wouldn't she go to him? And like, I have to tell you, if I thought really seriously that someone has committed a murder, the last thing I would do would be to go tell them.
Yeah.
I actually think that doesn't make a ton of sense. It sounds very dangerous. I don't want them to know I know, and I certainly don't want them to know while I'm in front of them in all my mortality. You know, it's a bit like if you know someone is known for running scams, you're not going to be like, do you want my social security number and my car, you know, my bank account number? And so with Annie, I think it's perfectly rational that she would want to go to the police thinking that her husband, whom she already thinks is acting in a variety of shady ways, has committed a murder. But because we have spent 75% of the novel rooting for Frida and Gabriel at various points and to various extents, depending on what's happening. But at the end of the day, we've gotten to know them as two kids raised in a horrible setting, facing a lot of adversity and trauma and abuse. We root for them. Maybe not in every way all the time, but generally speaking, we do kind of root for them. And so the fact that Annie is trying to bring some rationality, some sort of real world rationale to this is infuriating. Because it's like, don't you get it, Annie? Don't you know this is not the real world? But also she is someone, I think, who has had a much simpler life than Frida and Gabriel. And that doesn't mean she hasn't had her own issues and challenges and moments of sorrow. And, you know, everyone's life is complicated. But at the end of the day, you know, she was raised quite conventionally. She was provided for. And so I think it gives her this slightly arrogant, yet understandable outlook on life, which is, you know, if you know something bad happened, you tell someone and they make it better.
Yeah.
And so I find the way she acts to be perfectly rational. But because the moral universe of the book is tilted on its axis, then she ends up looking like she's not doing the right thing, I think.
That's interesting because, yeah, I mean, when it comes to Frida being the murderer of Annie, that obviously you kind of think, whoa, that's too far. But then, yeah, first, the choice that Annie makes.
I mean, it was something I wrestled with as well because I find it unforgivable what Frida does.
Yeah.
I do. And the only thing I can do is try to make sense of it in the context of the story. I often say this, people can do the wrong thing for perfectly good reasons. And I think that's something you come up against a lot in the realm of crime fiction. One time I said, you know, I do 5 unadvisable things every day before noon, and I always have very good reasons for doing those things, be it snoozing my alarm. But I do find it unforgivable what Frida did. And I don't think it's ever justifiable. I really don't. But she did it because given how she was raised and what she went through and what she knows about making your way around the world, it made sense.
Yeah.
And also, she really struggles with it. that was an important part because I wrote a serial killer novel before this one. And like the serial killer has no remorse about killing. That's why he's a serial killer. Frida is not wired like that. She knows right from wrong. And she can't forgive herself. That's why her mind is so tricky and uncomfortable.
Well, I think it's interesting that then Gabriel later says, and maybe this links back to the family aspect as well, that he would have done the same, which is quite, ooh, wow.
Yeah, that wasn't something, that was one of those things that I wasn't consciously aware of until I started writing that part of the book. And I thought, ooh, that's it. Because I had always felt like there was a part of Gabriel that was simply incapable of being comfortable with himself.
Yeah.
And that kept showing up in every scene I wrote where he was in. He's this tall guy who keeps sort of slouching, and he's never comfortable anywhere except maybe when inside a book about the Roman Empire. And and I thought, what is going on there? And I realized that was why. I think that it's because he thinks that about himself, and maybe he is right. And in that case, that would be a form of self-awareness that would be very, very hard to carry.
No, that's a very good point. Yeah. So I'm going to ask about Joan. I think we didn't find out what happened to Joan in literal fact. I think we found out that she was killed, but we didn't know beyond that. Did you see any connection, I suppose I want to ask, with Joan's death being linked to her association with Frida and Gabriel?
So that is actually the reference to my previous book.
Ah, right, okay.
Yes. In my previous book, The Quiet Tenant, we know that the serial killer in the book has killed multiple women, and we hear from them, but we don't know what they're called. We know very little about their lives, just a few elements, really. And so that is why Joan is killed by a serial killer in the Hudson Valley. And it was really sad for me to write because she's such a good person.
Well, I think that's a very good Easter egg.
Thank you.
Subtle.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, and to me, it was like, these people are in the same area around the same time. There's no reason their paths shouldn't cross, unfortunately.
True. I've heard, am I getting this right? You've got 2 TV adaptations in the works. You've got The Quiet Tenant and now you've got Our Last Resort. What can you tell us about it? Or them?
I feel very lucky in that regard because Blumhouse has optioned both my previous book, The Quiet Tenant, and this one to be adapted into a TV series. Well, 2 TV series, one each. They have been just wonderful, creative partners, and I've really enjoyed working with them. And the vision is really strong. I want to watch the shows, Mm-hmm. Our Last Resort, the deal happened recently, so that's the latest. And then with The Quiet Tenant, we have co-producers. It's the production company that was co-founded by multiple people, including Charlize Theron. We also have a showrunner and a writer called Anthony Zeiker. He created a TV show called CSI. So he's working on adapting The Quiet Tenant for TV. I'm very excited. It's been really fun.
Oh, I absolutely, I can understand the excitement. That's a good list of people.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
I think you were saying earlier, you talked about how you had your first draft, you abandoned, etc. So I'd heard that you favour cuts, and you've recently said that you rework a sentence twice, I think it was, and if it's still not working, you cut that, which I found fascinating. How does that work? Do you have to cut everything else around it?
You've done your research. I'm very very honored. Yes, I love cuts. I find that usually it's, when you're drafting, you're just kind of trying to phrase things in the best possible way. And for me, it usually takes me a couple of tries until I get there. And it doesn't mean that I rewrite the same sentence over and over again, but it means I have to write 3-4 sentences to get to the good one. So I find a lot of pleasure in just removing the ones that were really just steps along the way to the good sentence. I also give myself daily word counts, and I think it does inflate the way I write in the first draft because I'm just trying to get the words out. And then in revision, I will try to fix a sentence 2 or 3 times. And then if after 2 or 3 tries, I can't get it to work, the metaphor isn't working, I can't make sense of it, the sentence structure is not working, I just delete it. And sometimes something else can take its place. Sometimes something else needs to take its place. And sometimes I'm actually often impressed to realize that it was not needed at all.
Yeah.
And I think it's so satisfying because it's so efficient, just removing the stuff that's getting in the way of the reader reading the actually good stuff.
Yeah, so you have a particular dedication to just having exactly what's needed and nothing else.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a journalism thing as well. You know, you're
Yeah.
given a word count. You used to be given column inches. Like when you're given a word count for a newspaper, it's because literally it will not fit otherwise.
Yeah.
So you do try to be as economical as possible. I mean, I have some long sentences and some more poetic or lyrical passages, but I think they work because the whole book isn't like that.
You've got a particular way of approaching. Obviously, people do things similarly, and I have interviewed lots of people, so obviously you get some similarities, but just the particular way you approach things is quite different to what I've heard of before.
That's really interesting. Really? In what way?
Oh gosh, I think I think it is literally just your approach and just the way you're going about doing, I suppose, your cuts, your planning, your this, your that. Definitely the writing and how you wrote this book from the draft that I'm going to say abandoned. Yes, I've not heard that before.
Well, I really appreciate that. You know what? It's the thing with me. I realize I'm not great at sort of concentrated big efforts, but I am good at consistency. And once I understood that about myself, it changed just how I do everything. I don't know what it is about me. Maybe I just get bored or maybe I get overwhelmed easily if I try for too long, but I can write 1,000 words a day almost every day. I actually can, right now we just moved and our apartment still has boxes and it's really overwhelming to think of everything I have to do, but I can buy this lamp. Which was my project yesterday, So once I understood that about myself, my writing and everything else became easier.
Yeah, figure out your way of working. Yeah, I'm trying to do that with some things in my own life, and it does make things a lot easier. I'm thinking if someone said you have to write, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 words a day, maybe, I can see you doing that just from your sheer will to do it.
I have once I wrote 6,000 words in one day and I still remember it. And it was when I was finishing the first draft of Our Last Resort. So it did happen, but I wouldn't be able to do it multiple times.
Fair enough. What are you writing now?
I am working on my next novel. It will also be a thriller or crime novel or work of psychological suspense, all those things together. It has been really fun, actually. It's one of those where the characters have surprised me and revealed things to me about themselves along the way. I'm almost at the end of the first draft. I'm more than 90,000 words in, so I really should wrap it up. And then after that, I'm just going to have to spend a couple of months revising it to make sure it makes sense before I show it to my editor, my agent, my husband, anyone else might want to chime in. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Okay. So is there anything you can tell us about the story at this point, or do you want to keep it hush-hush?
I will say one little teaser, because I'm sure so much is going to change that I feel like I'm going to tell you it's about the deer in my yard and it's going to end up being about like a boat in France. Because so much changes in revision. But I will say that I have one particular obsession, or we can describe it like that I have discussed on Instagram over the past couple of years. And it plays a part in the next novel.
All right. Well, Clémence, this has been absolutely fantastic talking to you today.
Oh, thank you so much. And honestly, thank you for being such a generous reader and reading so closely and so astutely. Your questions were really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you in return. I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Do join me next time. And if you have a moment to spare, please do leave a rating and/or review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Podcast Addict. Thank you. Authors Afterword, episode 132, was recorded on the 8th of August and published on the 10th of November 2025. Music and production by Charlie Place.